The next chart on page 20, you've got gold reserves, and it's interesting. The more that stuff like this is discussed by the Western central banks, by the ECB, and by the Federal Reserve, I believe the more it scares other countries. And it's very interesting. There is this flow of gold from the West to the East that I've talked about for many years. And you can see it in this chart. This is a chart of the developed markets and the rest of the world of the official gold reserves. So this is central bank gold. There's a great quote on the bottom here. Well, it's interesting. Gold is still significant. I ask myself, if gold is a relic of a long history, why is $1 trillion worth of gold held by central banks worldwide, plus the IMF and other financial institutions? If it's worthless and meaningless, why does everybody still own it? And that's Alan Greenspan that said that. And what I find interesting, Alan Greenspan was basically an Austrian economics believer. He was an Ayn Rand follower back in the 60s and 70s. And then when he became Fed chairman, he became, to that date, the greatest Keynesian inflator in history. He's been far surpassed by Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen. It's an interesting comment. And getting to the chart, what you see here is the gold section of the bars is the rest of the world. A lot of this is China and Russia and so on. A lot of countries don't measure much when it comes to central bank purchases. The blue area is the developed markets. So you're talking about Europe and North America and Australia and so on. And what you see here is that the Western central banks were selling, and the gold section of the bars up until 2007, that stays about the same height. The reason that the top of this graph is a V notch, the gold section is going down because the blue section that's supporting it, the Western central banks are selling. But then in 2008, the rest of the world became the buyers. And you can see that North America and Europe stopped selling so much. So a lot of this, since 2008, a lot of these purchases are coming from newly mined materials and materials that investors have been selling. And what's interesting to me is with all this demand, and you got to realize that the scale on the left is not ounces. This is tons. So this is a lot of gold. And this keeps climbing every year. And it's because of the rest of the world, China and Russia in particular, getting ready for something. They know that there's something wrong. China, they look far out into the future when they make plans. They're not making plans for the next election cycle like we do in the United States. We only make plans 4 years in advance. They make plans 50 and 100 years in advance. And so they're getting ready for the next big change in world monetary system, and gold is their insurance. Do you come to the same conclusion here?
Yeah, of course. I have been to China quite often recently, as we published the In Gold We Trust report now in Mandarin as well. And really their attitude when it comes to gold is completely different. They don't care about daily price fluctuations. Actually, they buy anti-cyclical. So as contrarians, they're happy when prices fall because they can buy more. And they don't care if gold will be, at 1,600 or 1,800 in 1 or 2 years. They're really in for the long game. And I think it's very, very important to say that in the course of the correction that we have experienced over the last couple of years, gold went from weak hands and was put into stronger hands. And this probably also going to show that there will be less gold available in the next couple of years, because this gold that is, being bought by Chinese, Russian, Kazakh, Indian, Turkish central banks, but also private individuals and institutional investors. It doesn't come back to the market so quickly. And it's no coincidence that those countries that are massive buyers of gold at the moment, that they know quite a lot about inflation. They know quite a lot about monetary reforms, about currency reforms. So I think for them, it's just normal to have gold as some sort of a monetary hedge and monetary anchor. So I think this trend is really something that will continue to happen. And the interesting thing is, Mike, it is not only the, let's say, emerging market central banks that are buying, it is also some countries in Europe, for example, in the European Union. Poland was buying big amounts of gold recently. Romania was buying, Hungary was buying, and they're also repatriating their gold holdings. So they don't want to store it all in London anymore. They want to have it within their borders. So I think this is also a sign of this loss of trust that we are describing in our In Gold We Trust report.
Yeah, it's interesting that this is marked developed markets and the rest of the world, or basically undeveloped markets. I would call it dumb markets versus smart markets here.
I agree.
Okay, so let's move on. I want to skip down to page 22 and the Chinese versus Russian U.S. Treasury holdings. And I want to tell all of our viewers that the Russian scale is on the right-hand side of this chart, and the Chinese scale is on the left-hand side of this chart. And what's interesting, the people that in the previous chart, the central banks that are buying, used to be countries that were sort of hostile to the US dollar. But now it's including a bunch of countries, like you just said, all of the repatriation countries and stuff that aren't hostile to the US dollars. They're allies, but they're getting ready. They know that something's up. But here we've got the dumping of US Treasury bonds. But what I find interesting, Russia is almost out of US Treasury bonds at this point, which, to be part of the Bretton Woods system after World War II, you had to hold, a central bank had to hold US dollars or US Treasury bonds, and the bonds paid interest. So the central banks preferred to hold US Treasuries as a currency reserve. That is what sort of led to the global US dollar standard, is we flooded the world with dollars. And when that system, the Bretton Woods system, where the US dollar was backed by gold, broke down, the default was just that everybody already had dollars. We'll go on a global dollar standard. It was an accident. This monetary system that we're on today was a complete accident. What I find interesting about this chart, Russia only had about 160. This is measured in billions here.
Yes,
about $160 billion in treasury bonds, and they're almost out of them with maybe $5 billion or 10 billion. That's not even 10. $5 billion of treasury bonds left. China has 1.2 trillion. What happens if this trade war goes to the point where the Chinese just decide, well, we're dumping on, we don't trust the dollar anymore, just like Russia. We're going to dump all of our bonds. What happens?
Well, of course, that's basically the big threat, and also probably
been called the nuclear option.
Yeah, I mean, that would probably be the bazooka, and I think Hank Paulson once said, if you've got a bazooka and people know you've got it, you may not have to take it out. And I think that fits very well to this chart. And of course, Donald Trump, he knows that this might cause serious problems for the US and international capital markets. And I think it's no coincidence that now China is regularly updating its gold reserves. They give an update every month, and it's no coincidence. That's a sign to show, okay, guys, we're buying gold every month. Because back in the days, they announced it every couple of years. They said, okay, we've got 300 tons more. And so there's quite a lot going on, let's say, in the international sphere. And I think Jim Ricketts once said, if you want to play poker with the big guys, you have to bring chips to the table. You have to bring golden chips. And the US holds more than 8,000 tons of gold. The Eurozone holds more than 10,000 tons of gold. The IMF holding more than 3,000 tons of gold. China is buying like crazy and owns probably much, much more than officially announced. Russia is holding more than 2,000 tons of gold. So I would say that the most important countries nowadays, they already got quite a lot of gold. And if there should be some sort of a, let's say, a realignment of the world monetary order, I think gold will play a major, major role in those discussions.
Yeah, one of the things that I love on this page, and we'll wrap this up here, is you've got a quote here from Vlad Putin. I don't care much for this guy. I think he's an evil oligarch that basically stole, he and his buddies sort of stole the wealth of an entire country. However, sometimes he says things that are quite lucid, where he really sees things pretty well. And this quote says, "It seems to me that our American partners are making a colossal strategic mistake as they undermine the credibility of the dollar as a universal and the only reserve currency today. They are undermining faith in it. They are really taking a saw to the branch they are sitting on." And that is exactly what has been happening and what I've been warning about now. I started developing a presentation called The Death of the Global Dollar Standard. And I've watched this sort of come true. It's happening a little bit more slowly than I thought, but things unfold very slowly until the day they don't. And then there's a sudden crisis. And what I'm seeing is that this death of the global dollar standard, there were nails in the coffin coming every year or every 6 months when I first started out. And now I read something like every single week where countries are bypassing the use of the US dollar, because the US dollar used to be the only thing that you could use in international trade. It was all global trade pretty much was done in US dollars. But now countries don't want to be held captive to a currency that is being used as a weapon. And that's what we've been doing with it. So if you've got any comments on that, we'll close out this section. So tell us what you think about that. The U.S.
Yeah, well, I can only quote somebody, and I won't tell you now who said that. It says, "If the system collapses, the gold stock provides a collateral to start over. A gold bar always holds value. This makes the opposite of shares, bonds, and other securities that have inherent risk." That's not on Zero Hedge or somebody saying that on Twitter. That's actually the Dutch National Bank.
Wow.
So, I mean, it clearly shows that there's, quite a lot going on, and central banks, they're always very, very secretive, especially when it comes to gold. But I think such statements, and there were also statements from the Hungarian National Bank that we quoted in our last In Gold We Trust report, that shows you that those guys really know why they're holding their gold, that they know that it's basically the monetary DNA or the monetary backbone of every currencies, and that it will be needed to start over again.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we'll wrap this up. I want to thank all of our listeners, and be sure to subscribe to our channel and click that little notification bell. Take a look down in the video description, because there's a link there that goes to his website so that you can download this report and read it for yourself. I thank you very much for joining me, Ronnie. Thanks for the time.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll get together again soon. Goldsilver.com. Price match guarantee. Free shipping. Global storage options. Phenomenal customer service. Get the best-selling book, Guide to Investing in Gold and Silver, for free at goldsilver.com.